So we are finally in our last test of the year. Trigonometry. Yay, last test. Okay. So, trigonometry. I know a lot of you have never done trig before. This is going to be all brand new stuff for you. You've never seen any of this before. Okay, and this first slide here is just to talk about what we're going to call a few things. So, I see these two symbols here. Okay, and these are Greek letter symbols. All right, and they represent angles. Okay, so both of these are representing angles. And so that's just, we're going to use X and Y when we talk about sides, but if we're talking about angles, we're going to use these two things. And they are called, this first one's called theta. And that's what we're going to use most often, kind of like X for side lengths or for algebra. We're usually going to be using theta. But if we need another variable, this one is phi. And it's spelled P-H-I, but it's pronounced phi, like you pay a fee. Okay? But those both are always going to represent angles when you see them. Now, on your calculators, whether you have a scientific calculator or one of the yellow graphing calculators, I'm sure you've noticed these buttons before. Or even on your phones. If you turn your phone sideways and use the scientific calculator, you'll still see these buttons, S-I-N, C-O-S-T-A-N. And what they stand for, S-I-N stands for the sine, S-I-N-E. C-O-S stands for cosine, and T-A-N stands for tangent. So that's what you should call them. Don't call them sin, cos, tan. Okay, we're going to call them sine, cosine, and tangent. Those are your trig functions. There are actually 6 trig functions, but we're only going to use 3 of them here in this class. If you take pre-calculus ever, whether it's next year or in college, then you'll see the other 6 trig functions as well. But we're only going to be using these 3 trig functions. Now, this little word up here, SOHCAHTOA, okay, it's just a mnemonic device to help us remember what the trig functions are and what they do. Okay, so first of all, the SOHCAHTOA, the word, is going to get broken into 3 pieces. SOHCAHTOA. So S goes with O and H, C goes with A and H, and T goes with O and A. Well, what do those letters mean? Well, the S, the C, and the T mean sine, cosine, tangent, what we just showed you on the first slide. So that's what those letters stand for. The O, A, and H have to do with your triangle. So if I look at any right triangle, I already know that this side is the hypotenuse. We learned that last section when we were talking about the Pythagorean theorem. So that's where the H comes from. The H is always the hypotenuse. It's always the longest side. It's always the one across from the right angle. So here it is in using it with the sine, and here it is again in using it with the cosine. So that is the hypotenuse. Now, the side that is across from your angle, so here's my angle theta, across the triangle from that is called the opposite side. So that's where the O comes from. So we see the opposite side is used in the sine and the tangent. And the third side, so that's the side that's right next to the angle. Okay, it's between the angle and the right angle all the time. That side is called the adjacent. And adjacent just means next to. So adjacent. So A, that's where that comes from. Okay? So really what this is going to mean is whenever I'm going to be writing fractions, I'm going to be doing this on the rest of the slides here. Okay? Sine is going to make the fraction. So sine is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is going to be opposite over adjacent. And I know this looks a little confusing right now, but we're going to keep practicing. I know it's all brand new, but we'll get the hang of it. And the word SOHCAHTOA is going to be on your test. So this word right here will be given to you. Okay? So you just need to know what it means, how to use it. So on my next slide here, we're still not using numbers. We're just using letters, okay? So we're going to start here with theta, okay? So I can see my whole first line here is theta. So I'm going to do theta. Let's see, we'll do theta in green, okay? So here's theta, okay? Now we know across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. Across from theta is the opposite. And between theta and your right angle, right next to theta, that's your adjacent. I would suggest putting the opposite, the hypotenuse, and the adjacent, OHA, in every triangle that you do this with. Okay? So now, sine, remember this breaks up. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So my opposite side is M. My hypotenuse is W. That's all you have to do. Cosine is A and H, so adjacent over hypotenuse. So that's going to be P over W. And then tangent is going to be O and A, opposite over adjacent. So that's M over P. Okay? So today all we're doing is filling in fractions. So I'm going to do phi in blue because things change when you're dealing with phi now. So phi, my hypotenuse is still h. That's still the same. This is still the hypotenuse. However, now across the triangle, now this is my opposite side, and the one between phi and my right angle, that's my adjacent side. So notice how when you switch to look at the other angle, your opposite side and your adjacent side switch. The hypotenuse always stays the same, but the opposite and the adjacent will switch. So now the sine is O and H. So it's going to be P over W. The cosine is A over H, so it will be M over W. And tangent is O over A, so now it's going to be P over M. So they are very close to each other. Okay? But you have to be paying attention to the angle and where it falls in the triangle. So now, this next one's the first one that we're going to use numbers. So, again, we're starting with theta. I'll go back to using green. So, here's theta. Opposite my right angle is still H. Opposite the triangle is O. And right next to the angle is A. So the sine, remember SOHCAHTOA, and look at your previous slides to use that word, sine is O and H. So sine is 4 over 5. Cosine of theta is A over H, so that's 3 over 5. Tangent of theta is O over A, so that's 4 over 3. Now I'll switch to blue when we're going with phi. So if I go the whole way across, that's now O. Right next to it is A, but this will stay H. So now, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, that's 3 over 5. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. Now, for the last two examples that we're going to do together, I'm missing a side. But that should be no problem because now we know how to do Pythagorean theorem. So the first thing I'm going to do here is use a squared plus 10 squared equals 26 squared so that I can solve for that missing side. So a squared plus 100 equals 676. I'll subtract 100 from both sides. So a squared is 576. And then we'll take the square root of both sides, so that a is going to be 24. So now, good news, I only have phi. I only have one angle, so that's the only one I need to worry about. So this is my hypotenuse. The one opposite the angle is your opposite, and the one right next to it is your adjacent. So sine is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. And you can leave your numbers like that. I know you're used to reducing fractions, but in this case you can just leave those fractions how they are. The only exception to that is if you're doing practice worksheets in the crate, the joke worksheet, when you are doing the joke worksheet, you have to reduce your fractions. And I have that written as a note on the top of it, just so you remember. But that's the only time you have to reduce your fractions. You can leave all of these just like this. We don't need to reduce. So one more example where we're missing a side, and we're going to use Pythagorean theorem to solve. Okay, and I will tell you that when you solve this for Pythagorean theorem, you should get 28. So use Pythagorean theorem to solve. So we'll do 96 squared plus b squared is 100 squared. So when you do that, when you solve, b is 28. So now, here's my angle. So I know my hypotenuse is across from the right angle. This angle is going to be the opposite, and the angle between those two is the adjacent. So again, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. Now, you notice that the last two examples there are extra practice. If you want to try them on your own, the completed ones of those are on the classroom. I have them in the notes, so you can look at those. But try those on your own first. Use the Pythagorean theorem for the second one. And then you're going to fill in using theta and phi. Okay? The first activity that you're going to do in the crate is just dealing with these, writing the fractions. You need to get really used to writing the fractions before we can start solving for x, which is the next step. If you have any questions or need any help, please don't hesitate to ask, or you can watch this video as many times as you need.